Okay. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Wong. So Dr. Wong is a specialist in vitreous and retina surgery, and he's also an associate professor at the University of Toronto. In addition, he's on staff at St. Michael's Hospital, at Oakville Trafalgar Hospital, and at Trillium Hospital. So we're so thankful that he took some time out of his busy schedule to come and share his wisdom with us today. So thank you, Dr. Wong.
Thank you very much. In true fashion of Vision Quest, I've got very little slides, and it's more like going to be talking to you. And we'll try to describe everything. For some people who are visually impaired, I'll try to describe what we're going to be doing and talking about specifically what was asked of me, which is kind of the new era or what's coming up in the research in treatment of macular degeneration, both wet and dry. And many of you know, and you saw that or had that video, and you heard it, or you can see it, that really the revolutionary part of macular degeneration treatment has been in this anti-VEGF, which sounds like a big term, and it's actually quite fascinating in terms of how it was discovered. And it has really not evolutionary, but revolutionized our treatment. Prior to that, we used to just laser and destroy the blood vessels that were growing. And then now we can actually make them regress and people see. So the treatment has been every month. And for those who've not had or seen this treatment, it's a needle in the eye. It sounds terrible, but it actually works very well. And in most times, 99.9% of the time, it is painless. We do freeze the eye, and we do things. The worst part is this little speculum, as some people know. We keep the eye pried open. That's the most irritating part in the iodine. But the treatment has been always every month. And it's been an every month treatment. And coming up. So it's an every month treatment. And the trial's been for 2 years. Like the original ones were for 2 years. And it was kind of a burden. Like you come in every month for 2 years and you could do it. So we said, you know what, is this a real way to do it? Does everybody need every month for years, and years? So we started doing it in one of the areas of research we've started looking at, and it was started down in the States, and in Canada actually we've got a big trial running now called CanTreat, and there's a few other ones around the world, but we're the largest ones. One is we're looking at expanding the treatment between. So you don't come in every month. If you do well and the area is dry, we add 2 weeks. So first, if you're good in every month and it looks good, we then add 2 more weeks. You come back in 6 weeks, and then if it's no good, if it's good in 6 weeks, we add 2 more weeks, and we go to 8 weeks. So it's a very excellent way of trying to say where is the interval of treatment. So you don't have to come in every month, which is, you think about it, is a burden, especially if you're going down to Florida and it doesn't work well. So you want to try to find out how far we can go. And we actually go as far as 3 months. And some people go, why 3 months? Why don't we go 4, 5, 6 months? Some data shows that 3 months may be the limit. We're still a little bit chicken. We don't want to push it, but we may start pushing 4 months. So if we're really lucky, we can actually get people in between and get kind of maintenance dosing. But unfortunately, it appears this drug, this anti-VEGF, and the one that's known is called Lucentis, and it's a fantastic drug. It's designed for the eye. We try to get out to 3 months. And so that's a little bit what behind that. But just before, let me backtrack a bit because I just got out of order a bit. Anyway, what I was going to talk about, and I think the next one is just quickly on the vitamins. We'll backtrack a bit, but it's the vitamins. And you're going to hear a little bit more on the nutrition vitamins. I think the next talk, or one of the talks, has vitamins I saw. Just there was the original ones on vitamins. There's been a slight little change on the vitamins. And it's, the original one was called ARADS, Age-Related Eye Disease Study. This is kind of like the son of ARADS. It's ARADS 2. And another long-term study, and slight change. And long story is they took out what was called the beta-carotene. And there's a bit of a worry about the beta-carotene, especially if people smoked. There was an increased risk of lung cancer. So we didn't like that. And we actually found out if you put lutein and zeaxanthine, it kind of substituted. They didn't have lutein before because they couldn't make it, so now they can make it and put it into the pill. You might have heard all this thing about omega-3s, and they had this huge push on omega-3s. Well, this trial actually showed no benefit to omega-3s. So for the macular degeneration, other parts of the body, I'm only an eye specialist, so I really only know my eye area, but really omega-3s does not make a difference for macular degeneration. So really it's vitamin C, 500 milligrams, 400 international units of vitamin E. Now, there are companies that make all this preparation. You don't have to take it, but if you want to take it separately, this is kind of the compounds in it. 10 milligrams of lutein, 2 milligrams of zeaxanthin. These are things you get in vegetables. These pigments. They still want to keep 80 milligrams of zinc, and then the 2 milligrams of copper is just to offset the risk of anemia. And this really will reduce the progression of macular degeneration by about 30%, which is pretty impressive. And it was interesting is, we talk about does it make a difference in terms of what you eat and stuff. If you eat a normal, regular diet, you're pretty good, and you add this stuff on, it's pretty good. But there's a group of people who were very poorly nourished, and we look at those, they really significantly benefited from this. It just elevated some parts they weren't very good at. So these are kind of the vitamins we're now recommending. And there are companies, they're on the shelf, and they should all say ARADS2. You'll see some of the older brands that says ARADS, and some won't even say ARADS. So ARADS stands for Age-Related, A-R-I, Disease Study, EDS, okay? And it's ARADS2. Vitalux is, yes, one brand. There's Preservision, but make sure that it says ARADS2, because Vitalux has various brands in it. And so kind of jumping back onto the wet AMD, so we talked about the first drug called Lucentis, which was designed for the eye. You might have heard another one called Avastin. It also works, but we're not going to really talk too much about that because that's not theoretically an approved drug. But it works well. The other one is called aflibercept, or also known as Eylea. And it's the new kid on the block. And the studies now and the research shows this is a good drug too. It works in macular degeneration. The advantage is you may go a little bit longer. Instead of every month, we can probably stretch. The original one was Lucentis was every month injection originally, and then the Eylea you can go 2 months. So it gives you a little bit more. We have not had the experience yet to say, can we do that, what we call that treat and extend? Instead of when you're dry at 2 months, do we add another 2 or 3 weeks and keep adding on? So maybe we can get a little bit longer with the aflibercept. That's the goal. It tends to be a bit better at drying out certain parts of the macular degeneration. It goes a little bit deeper. So if you have, if your retina specialist says you have something called a pigment epithelial detachment or very deep blood vessels, this tends to dry a little bit better, we think. I've got a study now, we're looking at this and trying to analyze it. Does it really do that? So that's the kind of advantage. But the unfortunate part right now is that is not covered yet. Hopefully, at least in Ontario, they're looking probably early next year. Hopefully the government will cover it. And the pricing is still hefty, a little bit less than Lucentis. But the Lucentis is covered by OHIP, or the health plan, so that's good if you're over 65. So those are the two basic drugs we use for the wet macular degeneration. They're both injections. They both sound terrible. In one sense, we inject a needle in your eye, but those who've had it will also say when it works, they're the first person. I've had some patients who would scream and yell, there's no way you're going to put that needle in my eye, and they start using certain words I can't repeat here. And then I convince them, and they get it. They're the first people in about 1 month when they come back, and they say, I need that needle because I know my vision's going down, and this thing works. So it is fairly revolutionary in this treatment. In fact, I think the gentleman that discovered this, he's been shortlisted for the Nobel Prize in Medicine. So it's pretty impressive technology. So, and we're now looking at making these drugs last longer, putting into other ways so it can go longer than what we're doing. So maybe we're hoping 6 months, but that's a bit of a pipe dream right now. But we're looking at that. This is kind of an interesting thought. So there's a company and they're looking at, and the trial is just starting. This drug is not registered. Unfortunately, drug companies like to make names that you cannot pronounce. Regofenib. But that's why they also, when they make the trade name, it's very easy to pronounce. So it's a very interesting game. This drug, what's going to be very interesting, is a drop. It's not an injection. It's not a needle. It's going to be a drop that you put in your eye. Will it work? Well, that's why we're doing the trial. Interestingly, they call it the DREAM trial. The drug is not yet registered in Canada. It is registered. The trial started already. It's in the States. They are trying to register the drug here in Canada so that we can start using it. So I've asked in our group to be one of the first people to start using this, but we have to get the drug registered. And the trial really is to say, does this drop work? And how many drops do we have to use? Is it twice a day, 4 times a day? Maybe it's every couple hours. We don't know yet. That's one of the ways we're trying to figure out, does this drop work? And if it does, it'd be great. Is it going to be by itself, or do we have to add it with the injections? In other words, we may have to mix some drugs together, and that's one of the things we may be thinking about. But first thing we got to do is figure out if this drug works. And the promising data, it does. So it's interesting in that sense. And there's some very interesting, kind of an interesting thought on this drug. You know, you keep putting it in, will we use it? We're thinking, well, maybe we can do it. If you're up in Canada, you can have the injections for a bit, and then if you go to Florida, you take the drop with you for a bit. You know, there's all sorts of little permutations, combinations we started thinking about. So it's pretty interesting in that sense. This is probably the closest one that's outside the injections. There are some other ones that are on the table, but they haven't gotten through this far, as what we call a phase 3. So when we do clinical trials, first we have to test is a drug relatively safe, and that's called a phase 1 and 2. 2 is just a little bit bigger, so it's maybe about 50 or 55 patients or 60 patients to see is it safe. And the phase 3 is, and you'll hear these terms, phase 3 is the big trial. That's the one we actually test. Is it safe? Plus, does it work? And it's hundreds or even thousands of patients. And these ones we don't like to use, we always use the word, we wear masks, so we don't see who gets the drug and not. And I just look at the patient and say, oh, you've done better. And then we find out afterwards, were you on the drug or not? And you don't know as a patient if you're on the trial, because they give you a blank bottle or you have no idea what's going in. So we kind of figure it out and we break the code at the end. So that's why we call these trials. They're expensive, and that's one of the reasons why the drugs are expensive. It takes a lot of people to run these trials. And so you got to pay those people, and that's why the drugs are development. People don't realize one of the problems with all the research is why drugs are so expensive. It's because, in fact, only about 98% of drugs fail. Only 2% come to market. So really, when you're paying for a drug, you're actually paying for all the failures. Right? So people don't realize that. I mean, 40% actually don't even make it beyond the animal model. So, we have to test it first on animals, and then you test on humans, and, so it goes through. It goes a long trial. The Lucentis drug, I think the number was $1 billion they spent to build that drug. So, it took them 10 years. But it was a remarkable revolution. Okay? So, again, these are the trials. So that's for kind of like the wet AMD part. Something that we can, we treat very well now, I think, compared to previously. Some of you may remember or have heard of, we took laser, we did the Visudyne, now we're injecting, and then now hopefully we're going to move on to topical. And so drops, and hopefully that will be good, because that will help take care of a lot of you not coming into the office all the time, every month or something. So that's a one side. Now, wet macular degeneration, you might have heard, is about 10 to 20% of all of macular degeneration. There is another side of macular degeneration, which is the dry form. And in the past, you might have heard us saying, well, you have the dry form. We can't do too much for you. You need to get visual aids. You can take the vitamins, but there's nothing much we have on the table. But research goes on. And There we go. There is now something on the table for us and for the patients like yourself for dry macular degeneration. Again, another name that you cannot reasonably pronounce, lamapaluzumab. Right? And English wasn't my first language, so I apologize if I butchered it even more. But this is the first drug now coming out for macular degeneration. There are about 80, almost 100 compounds I now know of that have been looking in this area. 80% of macular degeneration is dry. And so that's a big area that a lot of research is going into. And so this is the drug. It's an injection still. There are kind of two arms of this drug trial. They call it Chroma and Spectri. It's an injection, again, into the eye every 4 weeks to 6 weeks. It is specifically for dry macular degeneration. And the phase 2 trial, when we talked about it, so there's just a little bit, the early part, the early studies, it worked about 20% in slowing it down of the dry macular degeneration. Also in this trial, they're doing something called genetic biomarkers. So all of us are made up of different genes, and some genes are on, some genes are off. Some people respond to medication, some people don't. And that's partly because of our makeup. In fact, your body is designed to get rid of anything that comes into the body, and a drug is something that comes into the body. So it's designed to take it away. Well, these drugs are meant to work. So 20% have worked on patients, but they found patients who had a certain genetic marker called complement factor I, and we can test for that through a blood test or a cheek swab. They actually got to 44%, keeping them dry. So if you had that, maybe this drug works more. So that's also part of the future of our medicine. We will now start to personalize or tailor medicine based on your genetic markup. So we will test you and say, okay, you'll work better with this drug or not with this drug. And that's the future. But this is the first drug that is now out for dry macular degeneration for trials. We at our hospital at St. Michael's and a few other hospitals around, I know, Toronto Western also has it, and I think Sunnybrook as well, has this trial coming up. So we have it now in Canada. The drug is registered. And in our hospital we have Dr. Berger, myself, Boyd, Giovadoni, Chow, Altamar, and Mooney all could do this. And we have a clinic, a special clinic, that is actually run by one of our colleagues called Dr. Boyd, and she runs what's called a dry macular degeneration clinic. So if you go, we get you in there, we'll register you and see if you fit the trial. And so that's something, if anybody's interested, let us know, we can get you in. Even with the wet macular degeneration, one of the problems is, even despite we inject you and we dry the area up, excuse the pun, the vision is a little bit lost still. And we think the dry macular degeneration still goes on underneath. It's like still two problems. You got the wet form, and we fix that or slow that down, but the dry form is still smoldering along. And so hopefully this slows it down, and we may start doing, one of my thoughts was even the wet macular degeneration. So once we slow you down, we may start thinking about getting in, once this drug gets approved, it may be something we can think about putting in patients to slow down the dry form. There is more research going on, and we've got some other things coming up, but they are still quite early in the game. But I said, like, there's about 100 compounds, and this is the first one out the block that's coming out. And so you'll see more and more of these things going into production. And I'm very excited about this one because I think this has very good promise out of all of them. So at that point, I was going to say if there's any questions, let me know, and we can start talking around different areas and different parts of our research and protocols.
My question is, can be done injection in both eyes in the same time?
Great question. Yes. For multiple reasons. We were very fearful at first, and so a lot of doctors were very fearful. Oh, we didn't want to risk, because there's always a little risk when we put a needle in, right? The eye's defense is really its shell. It's a bit like a turtle. You break the shell, the defenses fall down. So we always worry about an infection or something wrong with the drug. But we've experienced now. So, a short answer, yes, we inject both eyes. I have no problems doing it. And just as long as you don't mind as a patient that the eye's a little irritated both, that's fine. And it also saves you 2 trips coming in. So the question is if you're... Sorry, what was the question again?
In both eyes you can be some, like you said, infection. So better to do one eye in the time, maybe.
If there's a risk, the doctor will look and say, yes, maybe you're too risky in one eye. You only do the one at a time. Yes, that's it. But if they can, you have both eyes, they can try to do it at the same time.
Is there any person with perfect vision?
Sorry. Well, if you do the one with Mike first, then we'll take that one.
Is there any person with perfect vision who needs injection with Lucentis? A person who has perfect vision, very good vision, does it need injection with Lucentis?
Right. So if someone has perfect vision, should they get Lucentis? The question, we have to look at it backwards and say, is there a blood vessel growing? If their vision is good and they have active disease, that is, they had a disease of growing the blood vessels, the wet macular degeneration, then the purpose of that is to prevent it or slowing it down to get worse. We have patients, I've had patients who their vision was not good. They had the blood vessel, the wet macular degeneration. We treat them, and their vision gets, quote, perfect, right? Back to what we call 20/20, and everybody's happy. The problem is when we've learned we stop it, the blood vessel can come back and leak, and then they lose vision again. So we intermittently, at that point, give you maintenance dose. So that's where that comes in.
Could you please repeat the name of the doctor that does the injections? And do we need a referral?
Which injections?
These ones here, the Lampo, whatever it is.
We all do.
You all do?
It's just that we work as a team. So, like I said, what happens is one doctor does the examination, has no clue what was given, and the other doctor who is doing the injections will know. So you'll have kind of 2 or 3 doctors involved. But we work as a team, so just get your own eye care professional to refer you into one of us as the retina specialists, and we'll look at and see if you or whoever qualifies, and we'll get you in. You're welcome.
Yes, I'm from Ottawa. Does anyone at the Ottawa Eye Institute familiar with all of these things? And who would I go to?
I hope so. No, I do. They're a great crew up there. Great crew. Dr. Hurley, Dr. Leonard, Dr. Tooley. I can give you there's 5 of them up there. Dr. Britton. And Dr. Gilles DeRoche, I think, is on the verge of retiring. He's smart.
Hi. My mother has macular degeneration. One eye is wet, the other is dry. What is the probability of the dry one turning wet? And would she be a candidate for this Lampo whatever?
Yes, exactly. Lampo whatever. I like that. That's what I'm going to call it. Lampo whatever. No, very good question. Excellent question. So, in fact, it came from... Remember we talked about the vitamins, that study called ARADS? It actually came from that, where we looked at and say how many patients with one eye that was wet got wet from the eye that was dry. In fact, there's a criteria. So you have to look at it. We call it the 4-point rule. So essentially, it's at least 25% knowing one eye has gone wet. And it depends what they see in the eye that's dry. They have something called drusen, which is basically aging spots or stuff left over in the eye. And if they see pigmentation, then it's close to 50%. Would they be qualified for this? That all depends what the back of the dry eye looks like. The eye that has dry macular degeneration looks like.
Hi. I'm just wondering if there are any
Yes.
studies going on or potentially on natural anti-veg therapies? Because I know substances like curcumin, green tea, red wine have this potential ability.
There's a lot of them. The problem is they got to be controlled, and that's one of the problems. And unfortunately, and I'm going to put it very bluntly, a lot of these things take a lot of money, and the question, who's going to pay for the study? So that's one of the reasons. Red wine's very interesting because there's a compound called resveratrol, and we kind of looked at that, and I kind of looked at that. We did some calculations on the resveratrol, and one of my patients said, well, maybe I'll just drink red wine because, I'm not going to pay this. I'd rather get drink. And I said, yeah, we calculated you probably have to drink about 120 bottles a day. And he said, sign me up. Okay. So and I said, you need to see your liver doctor afterwards. But so it's going to find, there are some small trials, but it's really going to wait till who pays for it.
You mentioned the drug AREDS. Is it on the market yet?
So these are vitamins. AREDS is just a qualification of a labeling. So these vitamins are on the market, and it's AREDS 2. Make sure it says 2. That's the one we're now recommending. And they're over the counter.
This is a question regarding the AREDS 2 as well. Mm-hmm. With the PreserVision, I was taking it for quite some time, and now there's another new one out, the same thing, but just 2 tablets a day, but it doesn't have copper in it. Is there anything new that they've withdrawn the copper?
They should still have the copper. The copper has no relation to the macular degeneration more than the copper's purpose is to prevent anemia, because the zinc is really a high-powered zinc. So that its only purpose is to reduce the risk of anemia. The problem with I'm going to, again, bluntly, the pharmaceutical industry or these vitamin companies, there's just not, there's the Vitalux or the PreserVision, but there's not just one of them. There's like 5 or 6 of them, and it gets very confusing. So really, really look for the word, because they can only use the word AREDS 2 formulation, and that's the one you want to look at.
I was wondering, talking about AREDS 2, do you notify all the doctors who deal with people with eye disease? Are they notified when there's a change? Because I bought my PreserVision medications for the year because they're so much cheaper than the Vitalux.
Yeah.
But now I'm out of date.
Yeah, it's confusing. Doctors are notified. We can only notify them through talks, and we go around discussing, or papers, and they read it. But a lot of it's the pharmaceutical or the vitamin industry that will notify the doctors too. But there's no set path, unfortunately. So you just got to keep your ears attuned and find obviously the cheapest place.
I was reading on these new magazines about treatment for the eyes, the BioStim. Are they here in Canada, or it's only on States, this kind of treatments?
Still probably in the States. A lot of things in Canada are drugs are always a little slower to come to Canada. We're a little bit tougher. Actually, say we're a lot tougher, really, on drugs and making sure it's safe, and that's the key. Other parts of medicine, like devices, were much quicker, just the way our system works.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I find I crave light, like a room has to be really bright. Is that AMD or just age?
I got the same thing. I think, well, yeah, it could be multiple things. So I think the best way is you've got to be seen by your eye care professional who can tell you, is it macular degeneration? Even cataracts can do that, right? They can just slow down the amount of, or reduce the amount of light coming into the eye. But then you should make sure get them see you, because there are other diseases that can also mimic macular degeneration, especially for light, and so they should re-look at you. Okay. Yes.
If you have macular degeneration, wet and dry, and another disease that dries the liquid in your eye, does that make the macular degeneration worse?
Good question. There are a lot of it's variable. It's very variable. It's very interesting. Here's an example. We have a lot of patients who have macular degeneration, and and you have patients. We have a lot of patients who have diabetes and diabetic eye disease. Well, people have diabetic eye disease. Not many actually have macular degeneration, and for whatever reason, is it some of the medications or the disease process? So, yeah, it's quite variable. So,
when I had my cataracts done, my left eye, she hurt me so bad. Would that affect my eye to get this disease?
Hurt? What do you mean, during surgery?
Yeah.
Was it during surgery?
Yes.
Unlikely. This disease is really, there's probably a genetic component or a family component. You'll see it run in certain families. And it may be also environmental. Very much of things are environmental. So a one-time event, such as doing surgery, is unlikely to cause age-related macular degeneration. If you're sitting there, you can't see me, so that was the question, is I'm not sure. You'd probably best you need to be seen by your eye care professional so they can say, is it maybe just the glasses or are there other things? Remember, the eye is a camera, and it's like a camera, so it could be anything from the front of the eye, including the lens, the way the amount of light comes in, to all the way at the back where we used to call it the film, when you can show or it could be like the digital sensor. So all those things could be affected to cause vision not to occur. So that has to be assessed, and the best way is to get your eye care professional to look at you to say what's the problem, and then we can isolate that. You're welcome. Yep.
If you are already being treated for wet macular degeneration with Lucentis, is there any value in taking the AREDS 2?
Yes, if your other eye is not wet, you want to slow that process down. If both eyes have been wet, the data is not strong, doesn't make a big difference at that point.
Having both wet macular degeneration and cataracts, would removing the cataracts be of any benefit?
That's an excellent question, because, again, the camera, and if you control the wet macular degeneration and you want to see better, removing the cataract. In the past, we never said, we would try to say hold off the cataract surgery. Nowadays, we can say you can do it concurrently, because we can treat it in between the cataract surgery. And the cataract surgeons today are so good at doing their job at making the surgery that you can get it at the same time, and it may help and benefit increased light and contrast. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wong. As a token of our appreciation, we'd like to present you with a Foundation Fighting Blindness Leadership Award.